This highly anticipated retro-style JRPG definitely lives up to its hype. Let's skip the long intros I usually do and just get into it, and there will be spoilers here. You start the game picking from one of two main protagonists, Valere or Zale, two children of special birth known as Solstice Warriors. This is a great honor, but also a very unforgiving life, full of conflict and commitment. While, for the most part, this is a pretty lighthearted game, we do see early on that Sea of Stars takes the battles these characters fight in seriously. After a quick introduction and tutorial, we get a flashback explaining how we got here. Young, adventurous, and overconfident, Zale, Valere, and their friend Garl, who doesn't possess any magical ability of his own, try to fend for themselves, which ends with the three being outmatched by a pack of monsters. During the fight, Garl sacrifices himself for his friends and takes a blow that leaves him missing an eye for the rest of his life. This was something that kinda took me by surprise. While Sea of Stars does have a lot of JRPG tropes, permanently maiming a child in this cliché scenario usually isn't one of them. The three are saved by the village headmaster, who is also in charge of training Solstice Warriors. At first, Headmaster Moraine seems like an overly strict, kinda douchey teacher, but we'll learn that he has his reasons for this. While he heals Garl and makes sure that his wound is attended to, he doesn't really show that much concern for the child, and instead immediately takes Zale and Valere for about a decade worth of training. With the setup now completed, let's go over the gameplay. On the surface, Sea of Stars is just another retro-style game, but it makes some very smart choices with its world design. While most games in this genre just have you running from area to area, Sea of Stars wisely uses different elevations and puzzles to always keep players doing something extra than simply just running from area to area. It's such a small detail, but this change makes sure you're frequently interacting with the environment. Some stages stay more horizontal, but require you to frequently climb smaller ledges and cliffs to advance, while other areas are completely vertical and make your characters explore them up and down. This is the advantage that Sea of Stars has being a modern game as opposed to the retro ones that inspired it. When you're climbing stairs, ladders, cliffs, and anything like that in 90s titles like Chrono Trigger or A Link to the Past, you're very aware that you're still playing on a 2D map that's fooling you into believing it has different elevations. Sea of Stars keeps that 2D look, but it's more like 2.5D. 2D HD, I don't know what to call it, but my best guess is that they used 2D sprites to overlap a 3D game engine, and in turn this is some of the best pixel art ever made. Normally I'm not huge into indie games or the whole modern pixel art scene, but this has definitely been the exception for me. Despite the simplistic look, this game is very graphically impressive for what it does. I would argue that I enjoyed the maps and visuals in Sea of Stars more than I did in Final Fantasy XVI, although the latter is a massive AAA game with top-notch graphics. I love the little details like incorporating Sarai's ninja skills by having her cross ropes with better balance than the other characters, like Beast changing his living glass body into different shapes while crossing different environments. In turn, these very small details go a long way when compared to other big-budget modern games where fully animated and voiced character models still only use the same stiff 3 poses over and over again. Outside of the pixel art, there are just some really cool animations and visuals in this game. Bigger and flashier isn't always better, and since I just mentioned Final Fantasy XVI, let's use each game's final dungeon as an example. Well, 16 doesn't even have a final dungeon. When you make your way to it, you get an about 25-minute long cutscene that leads into the final boss. Granted, this is a pretty cool cutscene that has big plot points, but how the hell do you not have an actual final dungeon in a Final Fantasy game? Again, while that cutscene is visually awesome, it wasn't all that memorable for me because I didn't play anything. I was more disappointed by not having a final dungeon than I was impressed with the cutscene. Let's compare that to Sea of Stars' final dungeon. The music is creepy and ominous, the castle walls are a mix of stone and flesh, while ladders are made of bones, you're rolling huge eyeballs around to solve puzzles, pathways are formed by floating bricks, all while you're tricked into serving minions piles of rotting meat and fishing for skulls. Sea of Stars can't come close to matching the graphical power of a Final Fantasy game, but this is definitely a less is more approach. If you're someone who just isn't into the down-tuned graphics, I get that, and you're more than allowed to disagree with me, but when you can appreciate Sea of Stars for what it is, its world design and visuals are some of the best out there right now, even though it is pixel art. While something as small as needing to make your characters repeatedly interact with the environment to advance keeps you engaged, Sea of Stars also does a fantastic job of making those environments not overstay their welcome. They get right to the point and change it up just enough throughout the course of the game to keep things feeling fresh. You're slowly given different means of traversing these levels, like the wind bracelet to move rocks, the grappling hook to reach different areas, and even fully underwater maps. Is there that much of a difference between your characters running on land as opposed to swimming underwater in the grand scheme of things? No, but the different visuals of getting to your end goal makes it feel like these are completely different gameplay mechanics. A lot of these dungeons and area maps aren't that big, so they cleverly utilize visual cues and different elevations to keep players on the correct path. This makes those small areas feel a lot larger than they really are because of the multiple layers to explore. Throughout these different maps, puzzles are a very common occurrence. I loved most of these. Very few of them are difficult, but they will make you pause for just a second at times to make the right moves. If you're looking for something like Humanity or the shrines in the new Zelda games that will take some real trial and error, you're not getting those here. Sea of Stars takes a more simplistic approach to its puzzles. In all reality, there are more of landscape obstructions to get through than they are actual puzzles, but that was right up my alley. If I'm playing a puzzle game, I'd want more of a brain teaser. In a game like this, I really enjoyed the quick change up in gameplay as opposed to really needing to think things through. Just navigating your way through the environments is a surprisingly good time here. Pair that with some of the awesome visuals that are thrown in, and you've got yourself a great RPG world. That leads me into the combat, and it's also pretty damn good. Most of the time. If you're someone who's watched any of my other videos, you'll know I like to point out what I enjoyed in games, and also what I didn't enjoy as much. There were definitely a handful of things in the combat that I found to be a little frustrating. Let's get one of those things out of the way first, and that's the difficulty. A bit was made about this being a hard game at its release, and this is a tough game at the start, but I feel like it gets much more manageable as the game goes on. In general, I feel like that's a little bit of a poor design choice, as it can definitely turn off some players. Right at the beginning, you're going to be trading blows with enemies that can take you out pretty easily. When you're not familiar with the battle system, this can be more frustrating than fun. While I was learning the mechanics, I did briefly use the relic that doubles your hit points, and that was huge for me at the start. Once I was accustomed to the battle system, the game got much more manageable. That might sound like an oxymoron statement, but think about how many people called Elden Ring a bad game at release because they didn't understand how the combat worked or weren't familiar with the Soulsborne formula. With something as massive as Elden Ring, most of those same people jumped back in, learned how to play the game, and then loved it. With Sea of Stars being an indie game and the turn-based genre now being pretty niche, I feel like they should have eased up a little bit in the beginning to potentially not alienate new players. After about an hour and a half, you're going to get introduced to the live mana mechanic, and that was something I really liked. Off the bat, you're only going to use this to boost your attacks, but as the game goes on, saving these mana attacks becomes more and more of a priority. Enemies will charge up powerful moves that can be broken by using certain elements, and the live mana is a huge part of avoiding these, while also resetting their attack turn in the process. If you get too eager to dish out damage and always charge your own attacks right away, then you potentially leave the party open to equally as big attacks from your foes. Play too cautiously and always save these, then you can drag out fights that don't need it. The live mana adds a really good balancing act that won't let you just sleepwalk and button mash your way through fights, which can be a huge issue in some turn-based games. The timed button presses during combat aren't anything new, but Sea of Stars makes good use of them. It won't take long before you memorize them on the offensive side through sheer repetition, but using them to reduce damage is constantly changing. Whereas I said earlier how environments don't overstay their welcome, you can also say the same with the enemies. It's pretty rare to see enemies continue on in different areas, and that makes learning the defensive button prompts an ever-changing mechanic. By the time you feel comfortable, have them down pat, and are consistently blocking damage, is right about the same time that you're led into a new section and have a whole new set of enemy attacks to learn. It's another example of the less is more approach that Sea of Stars uses to its advantage. Nothing has changed within the game's mechanics, but now you feel like you're playing something new, even when you're really not. Little things like that are truly great game design and stop players from feeling burnt out by inevitable gameplay loops. I did have a few gripes with the timed button prompts though. Basically every character action other than ultimate attacks has a timing prompt. Could have fooled me. On things like healing moves or Garl's pressure cooker bomb, I had absolutely no clue where this window was or if I was even coming close to getting it. I'd just mash X over and over, hope for the best, and still never found that sweet spot. Same goes for something like Zale's dash attack. Do I hit X when he strikes, or do I need to do it right after the pause when damage is dealt? Don't know. You have a relic that can help out with this, but I used it for like 5 battles. I found the noise and shooting star to be more distracting than anything that really helped. This isn't a huge deal though, just kind of an annoyance. There was one character in particular that gave me fits, and that's Serai, for a couple reasons. First off, her Venom Flurry attack. It seemed to kind of glitch out on the second throw somewhat regularly. It was all or nothing for me. I'd either immediately mess up, or I'd rattle off at least the next 10 hits. Probably a me problem, but I never found myself messing up on the 4th or 7th hit, but I did find myself messing up on the first button prompt kind of a lot, which made it that much more frustrating when the other times I'd have big chains going while doing the exact same things. It just felt inconsistent. The much bigger issue with this move is that she'll literally jump off screen sometimes, and that's kinda not fair when its damage and duration is based off of you needing to see when she's at the height of her jump. You can try and match up the sound, but obviously it's way easier when you can see it too. This sounds like a minor issue, but there will be times you miss breaking locks because you just can't see Serai to keep a chain going. You miss breaking that lock, you're probably taking high damage and just wasted the MP too, a resource your characters don't have much of. Besides her jumping off screen, I felt like her backstab attack, solo and combo, could also be obstructed by the enemy sprites too. I'd always watch her dagger flip and tap X right when she catches it to get the bonus. Well, when you can't see her sprite, that kinda makes timing things more difficult, and not in a good way. Serai might have been my favorite character, so maybe that's why I found these more frustrating, but Valere would sometimes do the same thing and jump behind the scenery for her Moonmerang too, although it was much less frequent than Serai's Venom Flurry. They aren't game-breaking by any stretch, but not having your character visible when you need visual cues to keep moves going seems like an oversight in the design. Lastly, it can get a little confusing in the layout to see which enemy has which locks. Usually it's clear as day, but there will be times here and there where you're just not completely sure. These are all pretty minor gripes though. I would still say the combat is fantastic for the most part, and one of the best systems I've played in a turn-based game. There's no need to grind or backtrack for levels unless you just want more experience with timing attacks and defense. It always feels balanced, and even when you think you have things under control, even common enemies can get you sweating if you're not paying attention or trying to just spam your way through fights. It's a combat system that will always keep you engaged. There was one huge thing I didn't think of, really until I started making plot points for this video. You can't miss attacks. For the way Sea of Stars handles combat, leaving out character misses was a great choice. Missing a random attack that you need to break a lock or finish off a fight could realistically mess up your entire game plan, and that would come off as really frustrating rather than a game mechanic that's in basically every turn-based RPG. So I applaud them for that decision. Another small change that I really liked was how your party members can revive themselves after 2 or 3 turns. Since enemies tend to hit pretty hard, you could easily get stuck in a defensive loop of just surviving attacks and reviving party members. There are items to speed the process up still, but a lot of the time you shouldn't really need them and can still focus on attacking and breaking locks while riding it out with just 2 characters. If you're in a good spot health-wise or know how long you have till the next enemy attack, sometimes I found it better to let a character get KO'd since they come back with a decent amount of hit points. At times, this actually saves you from frantically needing to heal someone who's in the danger zone. Let them hang around as long as they can, and wait 2 turns till they come back with more health. Sea of Stars also doesn't let you just rely on your 3 favorite characters over and over either. You'll start getting some pretty crazy combinations of elemental attacks needed to break locks, and this will force you into using your entire party. There were times where I had to sit there for a minute and really think about the order of not only which mana attacks I needed, but also making sure that the correct character was able to use those attacks on time. Then there's small things that the game doesn't tell you that just feel good to learn, like using the grappling hook to initiate combat and starting off with live mana. Sea of Stars doesn't do anything revolutionary or groundbreaking with its gameplay, but it does everything very well. The focus was on being fun and engaging, and not trying to overcomplicate everything. It's a good lesson in game development. Sometimes the best solution is to just remember that games are supposed to be fun, and not always trying to reinvent the wheel, or giving the player so many options that they never use 2/3 of them. Quick side note before getting into the characters and the plot, Wheels is a really good minigame too. Now, this won't be for everyone because, like the difficulty of the main game, Wheels is much harder in the beginning than it is at the end. When you start off, I completely understand why some people will tap out and not return. Early on, you are literally playing at a huge disadvantage compared to the AI. Besides regularly getting worse spins because your wheel is awful, your game pieces are also worse than the ones you're going up against. I've seen a lot of people online claiming that the game cheats. Yes and no. Do they straight up cheat? I don't believe so. What the AI really does, at least in my time playing, is it usually mimics your spins. It isn't in absolutes, but for the most part, the game piggybacks off of you. If you get a good offensive spin, so will the AI. If you end up with nothing, the AI seems to get bad to mediocre spins too. I don't think it's flat out cheating, but the AI definitely gives itself good spins when you get good spins too. Especially early on, it's rare to get a monster round and have the AI get a bunch of nothing. So, to recap, at the start, your wheel is worse, your pieces are worse, and the AI almost always gives itself matching to better spins than the player. This can be frustrating early on, especially when you don't know the ins and outs of the game, and are going up against an assassin piece that routinely wrecks the good moves you do get. Beating champions early on is more of luck and good RNG than it is what the player is actually doing. Once you get some more diverse pieces, and most importantly some wheel upgrades, the game gets much more competitive and addicting. By the end, it gets a little too easy though. The Assassin Cleric combo is game breaking with the wheel upgrades you'll get. I really liked Wheels as a whole though. Once you have more of an actual competitive chance against the AI, you have to really start planning out your moves and also looking ahead to what can happen in the next round to keep yourself prepared. I would love a DLC that expands on just the Wheels minigame. Maybe give a bigger health pool, definitely more figurines, throw in an extra option on the wheel tiles, stuff like that. As it currently stands, this isn't an all-time great minigame, but I think it's a very good one that I spent a lot of time playing. If they expand on the game and balance the early and late game difficulty swings, I think it could easily move into that all-time great category. Okay, let's get into the characters in the story. From what I've seen online, this is a mixed bag with players. Even people that love the game have said it feels underwhelming, while some people claim it's one of the best they've ever experienced. With most things, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's a bad story at all. In fact, there's parts of it that I thought were extremely well done and memorable. Pacing can be an issue though, and part of that pacing problem is with the characters. Let's just get this one out of the way because it was my single biggest criticism of the game. Valere and Zale might as well be named RPG Protagonist 1 and RPG Protagonist 2. What is Valere's personality? There isn't really one there. What about Zale? I guess he likes to laugh at stuff, but that's all I can really remember about him. I don't have any memories of them standing out from a writing or personality standpoint. Garl, however, absolutely carries the first, give or take, 10 hours of this game. Usually I tend to get very annoyed by the happy-go-lucky, energetic party member, but not this time. Without his character, the first few hours could have been really boring from a story perspective. So, let's talk about that. Sea of Stars is a slow burn on its major plot points and simple by design for much of the rest. As a result, you spend a lot of time in the first third of the game not really advancing the plot. When the plot isn't moving much and the two main characters aren't interesting, that can be a really bad combination for some players, especially in a turn-based RPG where the story and characters are usually the most important parts of the game. As I said, I was really enjoying the gameplay and the art design, but I was getting a little impatient waiting for things to get going from a narrative standpoint. Luckily, Garl is around to keep things enjoyable because he's really the only character that offers any type of entertainment for kind of a while. They have a couple lines that set up friction between Moraine and Brugaves and Erlina, but not a whole lot in the greater narrative happens for more than a few hours. I might sound like I'm saying the beginning is bad. That's not my intention. The plot is very average for the start though. Garl being a likable character was really the only thing keeping me interested from a plot perspective. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of fourth wall breaks and scenes of forced humor in games, so I wasn't huge on the whole Captain Cliché and her crew thing at first either. Partly because Sea of Stars starts off as a very cliché RPG plot. Those two things paired together, I just didn't think was a good combination. It's not until Sarai exposes herself as an assassin that I really started to think, okay, finally something interesting is happening. I'm into the gameplay, let's get the narrative to catch up now too. It's around this point that I went from enjoying myself but not really being too invested to kinda getting hooked. I wanted to know about Sarai's backstory and what elements she was going to introduce to the narrative. I saw her as the piece that would initiate some plot development. Now, that isn't quite the case, at least not yet, but I did get a new character that had some intrigue behind them. Sarai helps you save Garl, and that means it's time to meet up with Moraine and the other Solstice warriors. This is where the pacing issue and deliberately simple plot elements come into play. So far, we've needed a boat, we've fought a misunderstood mole, we met some pirates, and we healed Garl. Other than Sarai showing up and then leaving, none of this has really advanced the actual narrative of the game, and we're like 8 to 10 hours in at this point. Now all of a sudden, we're getting this big boss fight and plot advancement. It seems like it happens very abruptly, but it's a pretty cool sequence. Getting there was a little bit slow, but these scenes ramp up the game a ton. It's another great dungeon, but now we've got some real motivation and things to learn in the story. When you get to the Dweller, this is just a really well-designed boss fight. Its initial Wraith form looks cool, Brugaves and Erlina have some flashy attacks, you get to micromanage Moraine, and your characters go from doing around 50 damage to over 500. The quick break in the middle is a nice touch too. You're wailing away at this monster only to learn it's not doing any real damage to it. Garl blows a hole in the roof to increase the Eclipse magic, and now we get the Dweller's true form, and it's pretty damn cool looking. It goes from a ghostly apparition to a straight up monster. The music kicks in, and we get the real fight. For the first time in the game, it feels like there are actual stakes in a fight, and it's all just done so well here. After the fight, we get our first big twist. It's almost always the stubborn old teacher that does something douchey, but this time it's your fellow Solstice warriors that double-cross you. Brugaves and Erlina have become jaded with the seemingly endless cycle of violence between the Solstice warriors and the Fleshmancer's dwellers. They feel like they're nothing more than slaves to their birth, and that this constant cycle will forever end in a stalemate between both sides. This is a nice touch here that's really easy to miss. Erlina is definitely more in favor of this choice than Brugaves, and they even show this in the animated cutscene. When they focus in on both their faces, Erlina is staring straight ahead and then quickly lifts her hand to create the blood moon, while Brugaves' eyes are looking down and there's a second of hesitation before he raises up his arm. This scene is barely like 5 seconds long, but Erlina looks determined where Brugaves looks hesitant. This is what I want from the character writing department. Even if it's the villains, I want motivations and internal conflict. I want personalities and motives, other than we're just told to fight the Dweller, so let's go fight the Dweller. You see Valere and Zale trying to brute force the situation where Moraine already knows they've lost. Next, Brisk ends up being the landing spot for the Dweller's minions and gets destroyed in the process. I had just spent 45 minutes platforming around the city to open treasure chests, and now it's wiped off the map. For now at least. When it cuts back, Erlina is still being smug, while Brugaves looks like he's not too sure about his decision. Along with this, Sarai clearly knows more than she's letting on. This cutscene is like 20 seconds long and is exactly what this game had been missing up to this point. Big things happen, and they matter. We get a brief explanation of why Moraine is such a hard-ass too. In defeating the Dweller of Strife last time, 24 Solstice warriors were killed in the process, and this will get expanded upon later. Upon getting to Brisk, things are bad, and these monsters can only really be defeated with Solstice magic. It's another nice detail that will get used in combat from time to time throughout the rest of the game. It's a reminder that while the other characters are doing their best, it's Valere and Zale that are the keys to victory, that the fate of the world is in their hands, and everyone else is just there to support them. This might sound overly pessimistic, but I was a little bummed out that Brisk got rebuilt so quickly. When Garl gets possessed or whatever, it's clear that he wouldn't be killed off that early, so it makes sense to save him. But Brisk being destroyed seemed like a cataclysmic event that was supposed to be a big deal. For it to all be happy and cheery again right after does take just a little bit of impact away from the previous scenes. But despite having some heavy plot lines, Sea of Stars is mostly an upbeat game, so it does make sense in the greater structure, but yeah, I would have liked to have waited a little bit longer before the town got rebuilt. While Brisk getting rebuilt was a feel-good moment that I wasn't in favor of, the Mirth sequence was cool. Incorporating their Kickstarter backers into the game was a nice touch, and it shows just how much it meant to the team. Plus, I just loved the design of the Cryptwalker. With Garl carrying a lot of the game so far, it was nice to give him a moment of appreciation in the town. We also get some cool scenes with Moraine as well. While everyone looked at him as this headstrong leader, he's been carrying more weight on his shoulders than the other 4 Solstice warriors can imagine. I don't know if it was intended or just the way it all worked out, but it's a nice parallel to Brugaves and Erlina. After everything, those two just wanted to be free of their Solstice warrior responsibilities. Now that Moraine feels like he's lost, he just wants to live free and forget about all the conflict too. But Moraine isn't coming here just to run from those responsibilities. He flat out says he has so much grieving to do. Says that after everything, he just doesn't have the nerves for it anymore. Even makes a comment about going anywhere that isn't Zenith Academy, meaning he never enjoyed being that strict teacher that he felt like he had to be all those years. This is a defeated man that devoted his entire life to a cause, only to end up on the losing side because he was betrayed by his own students. In the long run, he doesn't have a ton of dialogue, but I thought he ended up being a pretty good character. In a game that at times struggles to make its characters interesting, Moraine was fleshed out pretty well for the short amount of screen time that he's given. Again, this is the stuff I want in an RPG. Doing a side quest and giving a guy a cookie who turns out to be evil and says now his rampage can start genuinely made me laugh. Seeing the Sleeper and getting the lore behind him was awesome. The combat system is fun, but these events and everything around the Dweller of Strife being resurrected, that's the kind of appeal that RPGs need to have. If you don't have these big moments and character development around them, then what's the point? This is where I feel like Sea of Stars really starts to shine, and it's almost like a tale of two games. Now we have a true goal. We need to get to Dokari Village to find out a way to fight the Dweller of Strife. Yeah, we needed a boat and did all the other stuff to meet up with the other Solstice warriors before, but we didn't really have enough information to know why that was a big deal. Now we've seen what can happen when a Dweller gets too powerful, and know more about the Order of the Solstice warriors. It feels like there are actual stakes at play now. Whereas going on errands and finding new locations isn't different than the initial 10 hours, I feel like our characters have much more purpose now, and that goes a long way. At this point, I didn't know what was going to happen. Whereas early on, clearly the Sleeper wasn't going to awaken and destroy the world 3 hours into the game. Clearly Garl isn't going to die before we get to the first Dweller. Every single game that comes out is going to have predictable plot points. I'm not criticizing that. But what you need is intrigue around those plot points, and Sea of Stars doesn't really have that for the first third or so of the game. But after that, this is where everything comes together, and I think it's mostly really good from here on out. After some more adventuring, we meet up with the man in the archives, Roshan, arguably the game's most important character from a narrative perspective. We don't know a whole lot about his relationship with Aeferil yet, but he does make it clear that he has a code he must abide by, and that placing a Dweller on Mesa Island was just a prank to Aeferil. Valeranzale are very powerful, and Sarai is an assassin that can make portals open at will, but you're definitely given the impression that Roshan and Aeferil are leagues above them. We don't know the full extent of their powers yet, but we're given hints that these are two extremely powerful, godlike beings with a lot of history together. Before mentioning that code, Roshan even hints that if he truly wanted to, he has the power to stop everything that's happening, but simply chooses not to. It's pretty easy to interpret the context clues that Roshan and Aeferil have made an agreement to not get in each other's way. Roshan's workaround for this agreement is to be the guide to Valeranzale, leave it up to them and their power to decide the fate of the world, to nudge them in the right direction, as he says. The party is off to defeat another Dweller, and once again, this boss design is pretty cool. I could take or leave the goofy atmosphere before a big fight, and the whole feel bad for the completely random baby gorillas thing, but the Dweller fight is awesome. Oddly enough, and even though they seem really random, those gorilla babies are going to be a very important footnote in the plot soon. After destroying the core, we return to Rashawn for the final time to meet his demands. With this, he decides to accompany the party under a strict set of rules. First off, he says that he won't be the reason they win fights and refuses to use any strength past the party's own powers. This is a cool workaround to essentially depower a godlike being into just a normal party member. So often in these situations, they need to shoehorn in some convenient loophole as to why characters lose strength, but I liked how they just had Rashawn say, yeah, I'm not using all my power, cause that's just not the way this situation works. It's a nice little detail. I appreciate the simplicity. Secondly, that no one refers to him as the Immortal Alchemist. And lastly, as he stresses, most importantly, he will not aid in fighting any dwellers, regardless of the circumstance. While continuing their journey, Brugaves is following the party, and we get a flashback as to what swayed his decision into helping bring back the Dweller of Strife. When he and Erlina were just kids was when the Dweller was first defeated. Moraine earlier says that 24 Solstice warriors died, which is true, but in reality, everyone except Moraine died in that fight. While Brugaves and Erlina waited for their triumphant return, only a severely injured Moraine came back alive, literally crawling back into the village. Since he was the only survivor, this also made Moraine the headmaster by default, meaning this was probably a position he never strived for, but was forced into. After seeing such death around him and knowing just how much of a threat that these dwellers are, this is what makes Moraine such a strict teacher. With Brugaves and Erlina still being children, the two don't understand the bigger picture and see themselves as being more of bullied than they do trained. Whereas Moraine wants to rid the world of dwellers and never see that sort of death again, Brugaves and Erlina don't want to put themselves in position to be killed like the 24 warriors who died that day. These feelings of being scared and never fighting and ending war stick with the two into adulthood. Even as a little kid, Erlina is already talking about trying to find a way out of this life. Due to his guilt, Brugaves adds in a clause to their deal with the Acolytes that Valere and Zale will be saved from this world too. On the surface, it seems a little drastic that Erlina and Brugaves would take this deal if they could just defeat the remaining dwellers. This is where you need to fill in the blanks yourself a little bit. The Dweller of Torment was the main problem. There's too much working against the Solstice Warriors to ever really stop it from becoming a World Eater over time. First problem, it's too far underground for the Eclipse magic to make its way through under normal circumstances. Because it's feeding off of the Matriarch's babies, it'll inevitably grow strong enough to become a World Eater. Because everyone who goes to the island loses their memories, it was sealed off. Our party was only able to overcome these things through the help of Sarai and Rashawn. Erlina and Brugaves never had those same luxuries and believed that their world was doomed no matter what. They believed that the Dweller of Torment was basically a failsafe left behind by the Fleshmancer in case every other dweller failed. So that's just a little more backstory on why they made their decision to work with the Acolytes. This wasn't some knee-jerk reaction, and they had multiple meetings over the years. This is why the Acolytes tell Brugaves and Erlina everything they know about the Dweller of Torment, because they know it strengthens their offer immensely. The Acolytes placed the seed of doubt in their heads, and eventually made them believe that, in the end, their fight against the Dwellers was hopeless, because the Fleshmancer essentially made the Dweller of Torment untouchable. This also calls back to what Rashawn says about this particular Dweller being a prank. It was Aetheril's trump card. In case the Solstice Warriors were actually able to rid the world of Dwellers, he would place one somewhere that could never be reached. Everything would need to fall in line perfectly for that Dweller to be defeated, but that's exactly how it played out. However, this also wouldn't have happened without the powers of Rashawn and Sarai, which, again, is something that both Aetheril or Brugaves and Erlina ever could have anticipated. This seems to be a big point of contention online. A lot of people took this as the two just didn't want to be Solstice Warriors anymore, so they went a million miles in the opposite direction and decided to help destroy the world. While partly true, that's the complete minimalist answer to the situation. Was not wanting to be Solstice Warriors part of the motivation? Yes, but Brugaves and Erlina firmly believed that their world was doomed anyway, and they've already seen firsthand the destruction that these dwellers can bring. They didn't want to relive this or subject Valere and Zale to it as well. It's definitely still a bit of a reach for them to revive the Dweller of Strife and not try to save anyone other than two children, but I do want to point out that there was more to their decision that the game doesn't flat out tell you. Basically, Erlina and Brugaves thought they were fighting on the losing side, so they switched their alliance when given the chance. In the next section, we travel through a swamp and meet Yomara, who even recognizes Roshan as the Great Alchemist and gives him a prophecy. This is a trope that Sea of Stars loves to use. We meet the Elder Mist, the Dokari Village Oracle, and now Yomara. Even Roshan kinda plays this role when we first meet him too. I do wish the game would let characters figure something out on their own once in a while, or have different ways to give these messages of fate to the player. We repeatedly have to search out elders, oracles, witches, and eventually weird sky gods to get cryptic information. It's not really a bad thing, it doesn't bring the game down by any means, but in hindsight, it does stick out a little bit as an overused story progression mechanic. We do get an answer as to why Roshan can't interfere with dwellers, but it does make you wonder why some of these other powerful entities never really try to warn anyone or help out, and just leave everything up to random solstice babies and then hope their world isn't destroyed in the process. It's one of those things that doesn't matter if you simply take it at face value, but when you start to think about it, for example, one of those sky giants would probably do pretty well in a fight against a dweller if they felt like it. But who knows, I'm sure there's something that I'm forgetting or something in the lore that I missed that stops them all from interfering. Nevertheless, even though everything looks incredibly bleak, Zale and Valere are determined to keep fighting despite being heavily outmanned compared to the last time the Dweller of Strife was beaten. Brugaves and Erlina make another appearance but are defeated. The Acolytes challenge us as well but are also defeated. The party gets some much needed help from Kael and his friends, but they are still no match for the Dweller. While Zale and Valere refuse to stop fighting a losing battle, Sarai and Garl plead with Roshan to help them, but he remains firm on his terms that he won't attack a Dweller, and we soon find out why. Frustrated with his answer, Sarai throws the Vial of Time at the Dweller in order to stop its attack, which briefly works, but the reaction from Roshan and the Acolytes lets us know this probably wasn't a smart move. In an eerie scene, we see the Dweller, the Acolytes, Brugaves, and Erlina just waiting by a portal while Roshan firmly tells the party not to interact with whatever is coming. After a ton of buildup, the Fleshmancer makes his first appearance, and I love both his design as well as this initial character introduction. He has the look of a demon, but doesn't come off as completely evil at the same time. When we first meet Roshan, he mentions that Aeferl doesn't know that he's still living in this world. This is a huge reason why Roshan refuses to fight a Dweller. When Sarai throws the Vial of Time and it hits the Dweller of Strife, that's what alerts the Fleshmancer to Roshan's location. Not fighting a Dweller wasn't just to stay out of Aeferl's business, but also as to not alert him to his location and plans to aid the Solstice Warriors. Roshan wanted to try and do things quietly, but Sarai unintentionally ruined those plans. Or at least that was my interpretation of things. But back to the Fleshmancer's introduction. We really see that he and Roshan aren't all that different as people, but the two have very different perspectives on the world and their powers. Even though the two are on opposite sides now, they still also care for and respect one another. It seems like they somewhat amicably ended their relationship when they realized the two were using their abilities for different purposes. Aeferl plays the part of the god who views everything as his toys, but he isn't completely insane. In fact, he doesn't even come off as overly malevolent. He's just someone who believes that his alchemist abilities give him the right to do whatever he pleases, even if that means harming countless others in the process. This is where the god complex kicks in. As far as we know, he's an immortal being that knows there are many more worlds in their reality. To him, practicing his alchemy on others is no different than someone in the real world swatting a fly. This is a trope that has been seen countless times in games, movies, comics, and so on, but Sea of Stars makes the Fleshmancer stand out in my opinion. While everything is through his own crooked belief system, he does still follow his own code and seems to have a glimmer of humanity still in himself. He keeps his agreement with Roshan, he praises the Acolyte's dedication to him, he fulfills Brugaves and Erlina's wishes, and genuinely thanks them for helping him. In a weird way, he even cares for the Dweller of Strife and takes it with him, as he believes it to be his greatest creation that he doesn't want to lose again. If you talked to Teeks and learned about the Vampire Rose, essentially using this artifact will grant you potential immortality, but the user will be in constant, agonizing pain as a result. Aetheryl seems to respect that the Acolytes went to that length in order to serve him, even seems impressed that they managed to resurrect a Dweller, and listens to their advice when they recommend making Erlina his lieutenant. Aetheryl is clearly a bad dude, but he's not unreasonable or completely evil. He just views himself, and Roshan for what it's worth, as more advanced, more important life forms, which technically really isn't that untrue when you look at things through their eyes. What they did with Roshan and Aetheryl, it's a great way to mix human thoughts and emotions into the mindset of immortal beings. But this scene shows what making a deal with him really means. Erlina is in favor of becoming his minion, but I don't know if that was Brugave's intention this whole time. Getting a new form and becoming one of his generals seemed like a quick move right before he left. I get the feeling that his intention wasn't to turn Zale and Valere into Fleshmancer monsters when he talked about saving them. I feel like Brugave's always wanted to just go live peacefully somewhere until that's not the way things worked out. So there is a little bit of a monkey's paw situation going on here. The Fleshmancer gives all of them what they ask for, but it's also so he can further practice his alchemy and see what kinds of monsters he can turn them into. It's more of a symbiotic relationship than Aetheryl really taking advantage of them, though. I mean, he does genuinely thank them and give them all exactly what they asked for, even if it does benefit himself, too. Aetheryl knows what's coming, though. He openly says that his rule is about to be challenged, and that's also why he gives Erlina so much power. Rather than fight himself, because he feels like that's kind of beneath his powers, he decides to let Erlina be his champion and fight in his place for rule over the world. While this is all happening, our team stands there powerless to do anything, since Roshan will not let them interfere. When the Fleshmancer turns his attention back to the party, their deal seems to be an eye for an eye, as they call it. The Dweller of Strife took one hit from Roshan's Vial of Time, so in return, he's allowed one hit on the Solstice Warriors. As I'm sure most players anticipated, Garl jumps in front of the blast in order to try and save Valere and Zale, while Roshan stops time right before the blow. The two have a quick, pretty friendly conversation, where Aetheryl even compliments Roshan on his skills. I loved when he just turns to Roshan and simply asks him, "So, how have you been?" Everything that just happened is very important to this game's narrative and the fate of this world, but it's another reminder that these are still two gods. In the end, what's going on right now, it doesn't really matter all that much in the grand scheme of their lives. All this is going on and they're just creating small talk in between. We see their differences in opinion, and Aetheryl seems actually intrigued as to why Roshan is trying to help Solstice Warriors. We even get a cryptic line about how Roshan was supposed to reset the timelines, which in turn would destroy everything that currently exists. Aetheryl even admits that, yes, Roshan could simply snap his fingers and stop him, but chooses to let this cycle continue until a better outcome can be agreed upon. I feel like that's a big line of dialogue. While he's definitely the better of the two, Roshan's hands aren't completely clean in this rivalry either. The choices that these two immortal beings make have immense consequences across multiple realities. Aetheryl has his champion in Erlina, and Roshan has his champions in Zale and Valere. The two decide to let their chosen warriors battle it out and see who's the winner. When it comes down to it, these are just two gods on a different belief system, essentially playing a game of chess against each other, and our characters are the pawns. That's a really cool twist. In terms of introducing a villain, for me personally, I think this is one of the best introductions that I've seen. After the slow start to the plot, I know I said it before, but this is what the game needed, and I was not let down. I liked only hearing cryptic warnings about the Fleshmancer, and making the player wait to actually see him had a great payoff. The two end their chat, the music goes back to being scary, and Roshan sets everything back to right before he froze time, which means that Garl takes a direct hit from the Fleshmancer. Ironically, I got the impression that it's implied that Zale and Valere would have survived this attack. They definitely need time to heal up and recover, but it's very likely they would have survived. Instead, Garl is mortally wounded. Like Goku seeing Krillin get blown up, watching Garl take this hit starts the ascension process for Valere and Zale. We also get the reveal that Roshan has been the Great Eagle delivering Solstice babies the whole time. Garl remembers his prophecy and demands a flask of borrowed time, which Roshan obliges, and seemingly can't hand out unless it's specifically asked for. The happy music kicks in, Garl jumps up, and everything seems like it's going to be okay. Until a few moments later, when it's not. This potion is exactly as the name says, borrowed time. Roshan has to tell them that Garl will still die once his purpose has been served. The party splits up to help complete his final wishes, and then Garl really dies. I've seen people online complain that this section is another instance where the pacing feels off, but I think that's by design this time. Garl doesn't have much time left, and things are meant to feel rushed here. Earlier in the game, I think the pacing was just somewhat poor execution, but here I believe it's completely intentional. This whole sequence is actually pretty sad. Even facing his own death, Garl is still optimistic and cheery about it. The fact that we know it's inevitable drags this out in a good way despite how fast it feels. As Garl's final deed to the team, his actions allow them access to travel the Sea of Stars. With this, we make it to Sarai's world, and we see that this is a place where the Fleshmancer has already won. Not only that, but he's began experimenting on people and turning them into cyborgs. Now, I'm usually not a big believer in the whole heavy influence thing that gets played up in games, because damn near everything has already been done in some form or another. But Sarai's world gives off big 2300 AD Chrono Trigger vibes. I'm sure there are dozens of other games that did the whole bleak future thing, but this was really the first time in the game that I thought, yeah, I can see where they took the Chrono Trigger influence from. But I did like the whole idea of Sarai really being a cyborg this whole time. All game you're led to believe something was up with her, but that wasn't going to be my guess. The whole from the future thing, I did kind of figure that out, but people being turned into robots was a cool twist that I wasn't expecting. This is where the Fleshmancer reigns, and we learn that he's returned with the now demonic Erlina. Our first action, remove the skybase that's blocking out a potential eclipse, and defeat the dweller that's inhabiting this world. While I was really into these parts of the game, I did think that the Cerulean Expanse was just poor level design, if I'm being honest. I get that you're supposed to use those lights as direction markers, but watch the footage on screen. Despite repeatedly running in the opposite direction, I'm somehow sent right back to where I started. Without those light markers, these screens just don't add up or connect in any meaningful way. I just feel like that's not a good idea to include. You could be making this game on RPG Maker 95 and fix that problem. I hate to say it, but it comes off as kinda lazy level design here. Not a big deal in the big picture, but I feel like it needs to be noted. Anyway, we meet up with a new character named Beast, or at least I think that's how they want you to pronounce it, and get yet another really cool looking boss. I keep saying it, but most of these bosses just look really good. This next section, I'm a little fuzzy on. I'm not quite sure what god the bird people are talking about, or what their purpose was. I think they were worshipping the Speedball Network like it was a god? I don't know. I feel like they should have been a bigger part considering we learned that they were sacrificed by the Fleshmancer and used as his gift of the Great Eagle. Not to mention it seems way out of left field when that one guy shows up to destroy the teleporter at the end, and even gets a scene in the credits too. It feels like they cut content around this plotline. While I'm not clear on what's up with the bird people, this is a huge revelation for Roshan, as it means that April's heinous activity against the living started way before he was aware. This is a big deal because it means that Roshan very likely, although completely unwillingly, probably helped with and supported some of these actions. This is why Roshan gets so upset. It's not just about the gift of the Great Eagle, but countless other alchemy experiments over the years that he was unaware of and supported. In the flashback, April and Roshan were still close friends, but Roshan had no idea what was being done behind his back. This makes Roshan question a lot of his plan, and he abruptly leaves the party, only leaving a clone of himself behind to still aid in battle. Eventually we face off against the next dweller, unlock fast travel, and can face the Fleshmancer. I did a bunch of the side content, which I think every player should too, but for the purpose of this video, we're skipping to the ending. Oh, quick side note, after you beat the Scythe guy and the Soul Curator says he's going to summon one more enemy, he's actually talking about Brugaves here. Sarai stops the Curator from being able to summon Brugaves, but we do get a quick glimpse of him during the credits. There are two different endings you can get in Sea of Stars. Let's start with the first, as it's the one that the majority of people will probably get. Aferil is waiting for the Solstice Warriors and says that while he won't be fighting you, he'll play by the rules and have them instead battle with his champion, the newly transformed Erlina. Great boss music here too. As someone who listens to predominantly metal, I definitely appreciated the thrashy tone here. It's a cool fight with yet another cool design, but it is a little weak when it's the final boss. Because you never have to grind for levels, all players who aren't using relics should be right around the same levels of strength and character ability. I don't think I ever had a character fall into the red during either of her phases. Her locks are relatively easy to break, and as long as you pay attention and play somewhat defensively, you can take her out without much of a problem. Roshan shows up and tells Aferil that he's lost, it's time to leave, and Aferil holds up his end of the bargain. Although he does mention one final surprise. Zale and Valere have ascended to the level of Guardian Gods and fly off to fight against the World Eater, who's now been fused with the Acolytes in a completely random Contra-style bullet hell battle. It's fun, but it feels like just that, completely random, and then the credits roll. Valere and Zale are now reincarnations of Luana and Sullen, and they live out the rest of their days cleansing Dwellers and World Eaters from other worlds, while we get a quick glimpse into what other characters are doing with their lives now. It does wrap everything up, but this is one of those everyone just goes on living style endings. I enjoyed it, but I can see why some people feel like it was a little underwhelming. The Fleshmancer doesn't really get any comeuppance, and there's a lot of questions left unanswered, but that's completely by design. I never played The Messenger, but I've seen a lot of people online who have say that since this is technically a prequel, a lot of plot threads were left open as a way to keep those two games connected. On one hand, that's kinda cool, but on the other, it feels like something that's limiting their potential in Sea of Stars. But again, this isn't a crazy ending full of twists and turns. Roshan and Aferil had an agreement, they held up their own ends, and then everything is peaceful for now. But then there's also the true ending. Let's just get this out of the way because it's a pretty divisive topic on their subreddit and other videos' comments. In order to get the true ending, you need to complete a bunch of side content, which I'm 100% fine with. The side content is a good time here. However, you also need to collect all 60 of the Rainbow Conch shells too. That I don't like. When I finished the game, I think I had 45 of them, and then I looked up guides, videos, all that stuff I always avoid prior, as to not have anything spoiled. I used those and the parrot for the locations for the other 15. I made it to 53 before I just didn't feel like doing it anymore. It wasn't fun, it was just tedious. It seems like half of what I was seeing was people saying, come on, it doesn't take that long, just get all 60, and the other half were like, this isn't fun, I don't want to do it. I'm on the I didn't want to do it side. When I was a kid, I didn't mind resetting the PS1 over and over again for an hour to get a gold chocobo, or wasting hours collecting magic to max out stats in 8. Now that I'm an adult and don't always have the time to really spend on video games, going around and just collecting things that I missed through areas I've already explored isn't something that I wanted to do. Enemies became nothing but a chore during backtracking because they posed no threat and just wasted more of my time. Contrary to popular belief, it's not like every one of these missing shells was just run into the area, collect it, and run back out either. Not to mention, I don't remember every single one of where the 45 that I had already collected were. Yeah, the parrot narrows it down, but now I'm also backtracking to ones I had already collected to check and see if that was the one I was missing or not. It's all personal opinion, and you're free to have your own, but my opinion is that hiding the true ending behind a collectible is a bad move. And that's a collectible that doesn't even have anything to do with the narrative. Like, at least make them have some connection to the actual game if we're going to need every one of them. If people enjoy your game, they will gladly do all the side content that is being offered, but you can't expect people to be happy about backtracking for potentially a few hours in order to just collect items that have no use other than unlocking the main ending. Yes, you can trade in shells for items, but these also aren't items that the player needs to beat the game, they're just bonuses for collecting the shells. Since I wasn't using relics after like the first 2 hours, I didn't want to use the parrot while I was playing, which made me miss out on finding more during my playthrough. This also sucks because I didn't know until after I beat the game that I needed all 60 of these shells to get the true ending. Had I known that, I definitely would have used the parrot way earlier and made more of an attempt to collect them all. It's just a messy way to unlock the true ending. You can disagree with me and enjoy it. I didn't like it. Same as a lot of other people, I just watched the true ending on YouTube, and as a result, don't have any gameplay capture of this. Anyway, you revive Garl in a very similar way to how Chrono is brought back in Chrono Trigger. The item used to initiate this is even called the Chronophage. Whether this is a nice homage to another game or kind of a ripoff is all in the eye of the beholder, but it is nice to see Garl back in the mix. Everything plays out the same until Aetheryl is about to summon Erlina, but this time Garl challenges the Fleshmancer to fight his own battles. Instead of fighting Erlina, you get a really long and definitely better final boss showdown. So the true ending is that Garl is still alive and the party defeats the Fleshmancer in battle. But he does still leave peacefully with Roshan, regardless of which ending you get. For some people, having Garl back will make searching for the 60 rainbow shells well worth it, and for others it won't. Again, no one's right or wrong, it's all up to personal preference. But that's it. That's Sea of Stars. While there are people out there who felt like this was a little underwhelming, it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Roshan never had any intentions of truly hurting Aetheryl. He just wanted to stop him. In accordance to their rules, that's what happened. At least for the time being. During Aetheryl's introduction, I also said that everything that's going on is basically a game to these two godlike beings. In the end, Roshan's team won the game. After the game was over, the two just leave like two head coaches of sports teams do after time runs out. This round went to Roshan, and now Aetheryl needs to prepare for the next one. It makes sense in the scope of the story that was told. I really enjoyed the characters of Roshan and Aetheryl, and I loved the unique relationship that the two shared. While it might feel like a letdown to some, I think it's kinda cool that they didn't have the normal, cliche ending where the Fleshmancer is defeated, Roshan says he foresaw the future and knew this would happen the whole time, and everyone just saves the day. Looking back, I think this is actually a pretty damn good ending. Your party set out on a near impossible mission, and they accomplished it. Mix that in with the complicated friendship the two gods share, and my opinion is that it's a pretty damn good story. Overall, I think Sea of Stars is a victim of its own hype a little bit. I don't think it's perfect or the 10 out of 10 game of the year that some people are saying, but it's still really, really good. Obviously, everyone is entitled to their own opinions. I mean, every video I make is nothing but me putting mine out there, but I feel like the hype for this game made some people fully expect to get another Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, Persona 5, Super Mario RPG, all-time classic game. If you go into anything expecting that, you're almost always guaranteed to be somewhat disappointed. I went into Sea of Stars expecting a good, old-school, turn-based RPG, and what I got was a great one. It might not have started out great from a narrative perspective, but in the end, I feel like it told an awesome story. Pair that in with the great visuals, music, and gameplay, and you've got yourself a very good experience. You know all about the like, comment, and subscribe stuff. Do any of those if you feel like it. It always helps out the channel. That's all I've got for this one, and it was supposed to be a shorter video, but apparently I can't help myself. As always, thank you for watching if you did. It's greatly appreciated. See you guys.